entrance to any business organization of any sort. There will be no material on any of our programs which could in any way further the concept of business as cold, ruthless, and lacking all sentimental or spiritual motivation. Members of the armed forces must not be cast as villains. If there is any attack on American customs, and they mean conventional customs, dominant customs, it must be rebutted completely on the same show. Another big advertiser, Eastman Kodak. In programs we sponsor on a regular basis, we do preview all scripts before the airing of the program. If we find a script is offensive, we will withdraw our commercials from the program, whether it's news or entertainment. So we are facing a highly controlled one. The New York Times noted that censorship in the networks has lessened on cultural and social issues. I mean, you can now see a show about AIDS and a gay person in the family or something, or you can see a show about some women's issues now and then, but not on political issues. That is, not on class political issues. And even on the women's issues, by the way, the TV movie Roe versus Wade was really the first full dramatization in TV really dealing with, I mean, one or two sitcoms or soap operas had a reference here or there to abortion. But this was the first hour-long show that actually dealt a dramatization. Roe versus Wade went through 17 rewrites before it was shown, so as to not appear too pro-choice. And several of its sponsors dropped out. To NBC's credit, they did run it, and they picked up new sponsors in the last couple of days. The network, every network has what's called a standards and practices department, which we would call censorship. Okay, well, I've given you pretty much what I want to say. Let me say that people at this point always say, well, what do you have, a conspiracy theory? You think there's this little elite that conspires and manipulates and controls and wants to control these things? I say, no, I have a coincidence theory, not a conspiracy theory. It's a coincidence that Procter & Gamble says, don't ever say anything critical about business. It's just a coincidence that they happen to be a big business and they don't want you to say anything about business. Not for a moment are they worried about their self-interest and about the business ideology and their favored position in society. No. They do not look after their interests. You look after your interests. You have conspiracy in your life. You conspire. You think about, am I going to go back to school next year? Should I work this summer? Am I going to do this? What courses should I major? You check out your personal interests. School teachers organize into unions and conspire and work together to try to advance and protect their interests. Farmers do that. Machinists do it. Blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, all the people do it. But the minute you suggest that the people up here who own the land, the labor, the capital, the finances, the investments, the bonds, the stocks of this country, who own it all, the minute you suggest that they are concerned about their interests, someone comes along and says, oh, what do you have, a conspiracy theory? You think they're out to do this thing? And so, as I say, no, it's all a coincidence theory. David Rockefeller gets up one day and he says, what am I going to do today? Oh, I don't know, nothing. I'm not going to look after my interests, because if I did that, then I'd be a conspirator. But I don't like unions. Why don't I like unions? I just don't like the word union. It sounds like onion. I don't like onions. Yeah, that's what it is. What about you, Mr. DuPont? Yeah, me too. I don't like unions. Isn't that funny? What a coincidence. You don't like unions either? No. That's what it must be, right? They never discuss. No. Of course there are conspiracies. Iran-Contra is a conspiracy of such immense dimensions that we had a joint congressional committee say, we may never get at the bottom of this. Certainly the way you investigated it, you would never get at the bottom of it. We've had the Watergate conspiracy. We had the savings and loan. These bankers conspiring. The U.S. Justice Department saying there's been at least 1,000 conspiracies of bribery, embezzlement, and fraud in the S&L scandal. at least 1,000. We don't have enough investigators. We don't have enough lawyers to investigate these conspiracies. What the hell do you think they're always doing? No, not that they once in a while have to. They always, every day. Affairs of state, planning in secret for deliberate ends, without any accountability to you, lying about what they're doing, refusing to tell you what they're doing. They conspire. That's what conspiracy means, to plan in secrecy in this way. They even have a name for it. They call it national security. My son has a poster up in his house. It shows two steer in a meadow, and one of the steer has an anguished expression on his face, and it's saying, "Oh, I just discovered how they make hamburgers." And the other steer is sort of smirking and saying, "Oh, there you go, you leftist paranoiacs with your conspiracy theories." You know? Well, to answer the first question, that's when the question period starts, I'll answer it before it's the hands raised. What can we do about all this? Well, we can support alternative media. Things like The Guardian, People's Weekly World, Covert Action Information Bulletin, The Nation, and the Progressive, Z Magazine, a variety. By the way, I don't agree. In every one of those publications, I've published in all of them, but I also wouldn't, I don't want to say I agree with every word I've ever read in all of them, but they will at least give you information and analyses that's going to be different from what you get from the mainstream media. And so support them, subscribe to them. There are also watchdog organizations, watchdog media organizations that have publications. Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting publishes a thing called Extra. The Institute for Media Analysis, of which I'm on the board of directors, a very small, humble little group we have, but we publish a magazine called Lies of Our Times, and Times is written in Gothic, you know, to look like in case you didn't get it. And these regularly, the public interest groups, some of them publish some very interesting publications like the Defense Monitor and the others. There's also fighting the mainstream media, local newspapers and such. Sometimes you can get things in the local media that you can't get in the national media, like local radio and such. Sometimes some of the local stations are more tightly controlled, more right wing than even the national media. But every so often you can get things in local media, and so you should explore those, give an alternative perspective when you can. Fight the mainstream media even on their own turf. Write letters to the editor. I call up reporters sometimes when they write a particularly egregious thing, and I ask for the guy, and I tell him who I am, and I complain, and I say, what's your basis for that, blah blah blah, and why are you using this kind of terminology, equating Arabs with terrorists, for instance. And then, of course, there's democratic fight back, that is redefining the nature of private property, maybe. The airwaves are the property of the people of the United States. The airwaves are not the property of the networks, even though CBS, NBC acts like it's their property. Those airwaves are part of the public domain. They belong to the American people, and as such, we should demand that they fulfill public obligations, and one of those public obligations should be not to censor the right. They can have their McLaughlin and their William Buckley and their Evans and Novak and their George Will, but how about also broadening out that spectrum? And that's the kind of fight we've got to try to work for. They can't say we should be free to do what we want without property. Newspapers do the same thing. But the newspaper is not just a private market commodity. It's also dealing with a public responsibility. In that sense, it should have a public, even private commodities. Even a private commodity. Let's say you own a restaurant, or you produce whatever. You bottle water or something. There are public regulations to protect the public. If you're dealing with the public, you have to be regulated. I know the new word out now is to trust the free market. and put your faith in the free market. Do you really want to do that? Do you really want to fly on an airliner that's run on purely free market principles? Where would you land, first of all? All the airports are socialist. Students are staggered when they hear that. All the airports are publicly owned. They're run by the federal government. The air traffic controllers are employees of the federal government and all. What would you do? I mean, would it be open competition? Would you have United kind of get in there ahead of Northwestern? Oh, we got in there first. Boy, we're a better airliner than you. You would really have choice, wouldn't you? You could fly maintenance or non-maintenance and all that sort of thing. So, but we do of course need regulations that are in the public interest. Because you own something doesn't give you tyrannical rights. That doesn't make you Genghis Khan over your little satrapy when you're dealing with the public. You still have obligations, and that should be true for the media also. The goal is not to censor, but to impose standards that allow for more and wider political, social, and cultural diversity, and more critical political perspectives. An informed, critical citizenry is the best hope in the far from completed struggle for political and economic democracy. I had a student, that is the closing line, but let me just add one last thing. During the Gulf War, I was lecturing at George Mason, and students said, well, here's where you and I differ because I have faith in the president. I said, wait a minute, you have faith in the president? You mean you go like this when you see him, or you go like that, or... I said, you should have faith in Jesus, or Allah, or Buddha, or Muhammad, or whoever, or the cosmic totality. It's a new age now, the cosmic totality. That's what you have faith in. But the essence of democracy is you don't have faith. You don't like them as a matter of faith. You're going to give them blindly, put your interests in their hands and just have faith that they will protect your interests. The essence of democracy is not that faith and trust. It is distrust. It is accountability. It is competition. It is clash. It is accessibility to information. It's debate and dialogue. That's the essence of democracy. So, a little less faith and a little more struggle. Thank you very much.
If Mr. Perenni is willing, we'll take a few more questions. I want to mention first, though, that there's a flyer over on the table there, and it's called Talks by Michael Parenti. People's Video presents Talks by Michael Parenti, and it gives a list of various videos and talks that he's given, and I suggest that you pick that up on your way out. So,
those talks are sold at cost. Nobody makes it. All the labor is donated, including mine. Nobody makes a penny. And you could also, people ask me about where to get books. The same flyer will tell you that. Yes, questions? Okay, let's give the media man the first choice here. Right, yeah. Man behind the camera. Got to treat him with respect here.
When John Stockwell was here, John Stockwell, who worked in the Central Intelligence Agency for 15 years, he said that 1/3 of a wing of the agency officers was devoted to putting false information or propaganda into the media. He also said that the CIA has about, I believe it's either 200 or 300 journalists, a lot of them renowned, has them on their payroll. And I'd just like to comment on those allegations by someone.
Well, they're not allegations. Those are that's public record. I mean, at least the CIA admitted during the church hearings that about 500 journalists, not the CIA guys who pose as journalists, but journalists who are legitimate, bona fide professional journalists who are on the CIA payroll. Yeah, I'll name names: Ben Bradley, David Broder of the Washington Post. Half the Copley staff were on CIA payroll. It's no secret. William Buckley came out of CIA, and you go on. So yes, the CIA also owns around the world about 200 newspapers, publishing houses, and periodicals. And a lot of it is by blowback. They're not supposed to, but they're prohibited by law to propagandize the American people. Congress was uneasy in forming a secret intelligence organization. It said it isn't supposed to operate among Americans. It's only supposed to operate out there. But what they often do is just plant stories out there and then those stories are in newspapers, and then it's called blowback, and then U.S. press picks them up thinking they're legitimate stories done by legitimate people, and they end up in the U.S. press anyway, so they can get them in here. I think that gentleman's hand was up next. Yeah.
Where did Ted Turner stand on supporting Peter Arnett and those broadcasts during the war? Did he personally support them, or did they sort of get out of hand before they pulled it off?
He just recently said that yes, Saddam Hussein used CNN, but so did the White House, and so did everybody else. Were used by everybody. So he, in effect, gave his support. But he backed Arnett. Yes, sir.
You have a very impressive publication record. How much censorship do you have?
Did you all hear that question? He said I had an impressive publication record. I want to make sure you heard that. And how much censorship did I encounter? Lots, all the time. Most recently, when I was out at Cal State Northridge, as he mentioned, as a guest professor there, the phone rang, and it was the executive director of Morning Edition on NPR, and she said, the news director, and she said, we're thinking of having you as a regular commentator on Morning Edition. We have Cokie Roberts and Kevin Phillips, and we want to broaden it out, and your name keeps coming up. Would you be interested? Want to broaden it out? I said, how about deepening it a little? I didn't say that. I bit my tongue. So I said, sure, okay. He said, well, could you send us a couple of things you've done and all that? I read your article here, and I read an article there, and that was really good and everything. I said, sure, yeah, okay. And I sent it. And then my friend said, well, why aren't you more enthusiastic about it? I said, because it's not going to happen. You know? I mean, if my theory is correct, it's not going to happen. So it didn't happen. I never heard from him. 8 months later, the new news director called me and said, we haven't forgotten you, and would you still be interested? So I said, well, yeah, I got this thing up. I did a little op-ed piece. I could cut it down. It's very short. You only get 2.5 minutes commentator. It's like 400-word thing. You got to read it. I even got to the point where I went to the studio and cut the tape. And it had some things in it. I had a hassle with them. Well, how do you know this for sure? And what makes you say that a lot of Panamanians were killed? And, blah, blah, blah. And we had to struggle over that. And it was really mostly about Bush and Panama and Grenada and Iraq, and whose interests he was supporting. But what I managed to hold on to in that statement, I was rather surprised when I left the studio feeling, hey, that is a little wedge, a little breakthrough. And she said, well, it'll be on tomorrow morning. And she said, do you have anything else? I said, well, yeah, I have something on the Supreme Court and this. She says, great, you want to cut that tomorrow? I said, no, I'm going to be in the National Archives maybe next week sometime. She said, okay. And it never got on. And I listened the next morning and it wasn't on. And then she called and said, well, it was killed upstairs. And they said, we don't hear anything new in this. I said, wait a minute, is your custom to play the tape for the people upstairs? He said, well, when they saw your name, they wanted to hear it. I said, they didn't hear anything new. They heard something new in it. That's why they killed it. And she said, I only work here. Which tells you. So there's an example. Op-eds I've sent in that have been turned down or cut. I mean, not that they have to publish everything I ever write, but yeah. Get censored. You even get censored on the left by some of your left publications. Once they decided you're too explicitly Marxist, so you have your class analysis and all that, and they get uncomfortable with that, and they will censor you. Or if you're not willing to, every fourth sentence, take a swipe at the Soviet Union. You see, my buddy Noam Chomsky always does that. He says, we shouldn't be doing this in Panama. We're just as bad as they are in Afghanistan. We shouldn't do this. Otherwise, we'll be like the Russians. We mustn't do this. Otherwise, we'll be as bad as them. And I don't do that. I figure there's enough people talking about how bad. That doesn't mean I wasn't critical of the Soviet Union, but I actually did something else. I actually said positive things. I used to say that it was a good idea to have a guaranteed right to a job, and national health insurance like they had in the Soviet Union. I actually said things that once you even say that, Democratic Socialists of America never had me back for a talk once I said that. What? I remember the stir in the audience. What did he say? I said the human services, the idea of, democratic human services available for all, as you see in existing socialist countries, when they still existed, were a good thing. By the way, when they overthrew those communist governments, they had no intentions of overthrowing those human services and those gains of socialism. They thought they were going to keep all that and then get all the other goodies on top of that. It turns out they're not getting either now. That it's all being taken away from them. The Polish workers got what they want, and they got it right up their kazoo. They got it in spades. Okay, we must now hear from a member of the opposite gender, as they say. We've heard from 3 men. We'll now hear from, yes. Other gender, I mean. What? Go ahead. Yes, that's you. That's you. But I heard some guy here saying opposite gender. You know what I mean. Come on. Go ahead.
What about censorship from your academic colleagues? I assume you've been on academic appointments from your peers.
Well, in the late 60s, I was considered a very promising political scientist, and I used to get lots of plum job offers, and I had published in the leading academic journals and won a Ford Foundation grant, Social Science Research Council grant, and all that stuff happened. And then I got radicalized. I decided the Vietnam War was very bad, and I not only raised questions about the war, which a lot of people were doing, but then I raised questions about the system that produced the war, or the people who produced the war, and then I raised questions about the system that produced the people, and then I did another thing, which was, not only did I criticize, but I got very activist. I got arrested and beaten up by the police and led all sorts of student things and all that. And jobs just disappeared. I've not had a regular academic appointment since then. My career was ruined as a political scientist. Well, that's what you get. You get like a 1 semester thing here. A couple of people in that department like your work, and they persuade the administration he's only going to be here for a semester. He'll go after that and that sort of thing. But they were very lean, tough years, and it's not easy to see colleagues of yours, who you knew in graduate school at Yale, who are now getting chairs and getting their sabbaticals, taking their sabbaticals off at Oxford, England, and all that. And here you trying to figure out how to pay the rent in a little efficiency apartment and figuring out how the hell you're going to survive and feed your kid. So it was. So you do pay a price sometimes for not just speaking the truth, but acting on it can be very dangerous in this free, open, pluralistic, democratic society of ours. I could tell you about. I have a whole range of FBI stories. Me and the FBI, I ought to sit down and write down visits from the FBI I've gotten and dopey things they do. They really are dopey. You hear that? Yes, anybody? Next, anybody else you have here? Yes, I knew your hand was up before, yeah. It was Morning Edition, yes, NPR. National Public Radio, occasionally you'll get a little something in NPR that you don't get in the networks. But for the most part, NPR is as bad as the other mainstream media in the propaganda and ideology and limited commentary and information that they will allow. Their commentators are from the American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, this, that, the other thing. They, not even a few liberals now and then from, say, the Institute for Policy Studies or something. Not even that, So they have the same distortions. Yes. Yeah. Why don't we make this? Go ahead. Yeah. Two more questions. That's it.
What you've been talking about, I sort of guessed the answer to this, but and you sort of alluded to it earlier. But what about book publishers? I mean, are they a little more immune from censorship? I mean, I don't really know a lot about them, so I don't have to profess ignorance. But I mean, are they a little bit more able or willing to broaden the political spectrum, or is that not really happening there?
No, not really. I think maybe a little more. I mean, you can get things. Well, A little more than what? Than the New York Times? You mean?
Right, the mainstream media, newspapers.
Yeah, I mean, my publisher is a big mainstream publisher, St. Martin's Press. I'm their house radical. I think I'm the only one there. Well, yeah, because they make money off my book. The Democracy for the Few has been used as an alternative text in about 400 universities. That's how I survived those years. If I didn't have that book, I wouldn't have survived. That was giving me an income of, back in the mid to late 70s, I was getting $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year from that book, and I would live on that. But I've had books turned down by a lot of mainstream publishers because of that, and it would be ideologically said, you know. I mean, the thing you got back, you'd say, well, blah 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 blah, quick to label it and all that. That's why you have to have small publishers like South End Press and Zed and a few others, Lawrence Hill, a few others, will do these books. Small publishers who have very little promotional work, have very little field staff, and very little, because the big houses generally do not accept your stuff. And then there's another thing, turned down in regard to invitations. The Center for Behavioral Sciences, they were after me until I got radicalized, and then I never heard from them again. They asked me to write in and this, that, things like that. The Smithsonian Institute. There are all sorts of programs, the one at Princeton. We don't get foundation grants. We don't get offers. When we apply for them and they look at our names or they look at the subject we wanted to study, that's it. So it's a closed system. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, all of it's an uphill battle. Yeah. Well, let's make this the last question. Okay.
What's your assessment of the media's treatment of changes in Soviet Union and Eastern Europe? Kind of started with it. Some of it's changed.
The question is, what's my assessment of the media's treatment of changes in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union? Well, I don't know. I mean, it was a big celebration. It was they came out of the closet because it was safe to come out of the closet. For years they said it was a question of democracy. Now they said it's free markets, and they treated these movements as democratic movements. Democracy was used to overthrow the communist governments, and now democracy has to be clamped back down and put back in the bottle to institute the so-called reforms. They use the word reforms to mean free market slash and burn lacerations, and the democratic powers are a problem. Yeltsin is calling for autocratic presidential powers. Gorbachev disbanded the Soviet Congress. The Polish president wanted the parliament to suspend its powers and let him rule by edict. The Polish Prime Minister, Lech Wałęsa, the president, has been wanting that for years. He's making statements. You saw the one that got big play in the papers. I don't know if it was the Washington Post or the New York Times. I read them both. With a big box cut, you know, with a quote from inside the article and blown up about all this democracy talk. You can't drive a bus with democracy. If everybody in the bus was grabbing their hands on the wheels, we would hit the first tree. So this democracy stuff now suddenly, he was a big Democrat when it came to getting rid of socialism, but now democracy is kind of a silly thing. That kind of stuff is not being pointed out in the media. There's no consideration of the fact that there might have been some things that were worthwhile in those other regimes that would have been worth keeping. That's something that never gets into the media. That would be another whole talk. I have a talk on Eastern Europe and Marxism, but you're not going to hear it tonight, you lucky people. Okay, thank you very much.